If you need structured guidance on a missing persons case, I now offer limited case consultations. Details are at missingpersonsconsulting.com. Stephen Keith Roberson, he went by his middle name, was a 26-year-old from Ozona, Texas. He worked in the oil fields and was single with no kids. On the night of September 5th, 2018, the truck Keith had been driving was found wrecked on the east side of Sonora on I-10. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. As all of you know by now, here at Unfound, we are not just about publicity. We are about education. I'm hoping that not only are you becoming aware of disappearances, many of which are new to you, but you are learning why people go missing, that disappearances are not short moments in time, but are a list of incidents that lead up to that moment. For car wreck disappearances, you've actually heard more about this type than you might realize. In fact, a few of them are some of Unfound's most well-known episodes. Jason Landry, Mara Murray, Shane Fell, to name just a few. And we can't forget the solved ones, Esther Westenbarger and Matthew Braswell. And it's interesting, with two of those, Jason and Mara's, rumors persist that they actually weren't behind the wheel. Well, with Keith Roberson, we may have to entertain that idea again because the truck wasn't his. How did this vehicle get put on a crash course? And now a summary of the case. Keith Roberson, he also had the nickname Monkey, had a very common Texas upbringing despite his parents getting divorced. He was an only child, thus Keith was mildly spoiled. He graduated high school, but already at this time, Keith had begun his drug addiction, starting with alcohol and marijuana, and it all progressively getting worse. He got a job in the oil fields and was essentially a functioning addict who was known as an excellent employee. Yet, during a traffic stop, Keith got caught with drugs, and instead of taking probation, which would have gotten in the way of his work, he went to prison for several months. Keith recovered from this stint very well and bought a new truck in December 2017. However, Keith totaled it just 2 weeks before he disappeared. So, on September 5th, 2018, Keith was at an oil field north of Ozona. He called his mother because he was short on money. She suggested Keith ask his father. He said he would. 3 hours after that talk with his mother, approximately 9:30 p.m., and 45 minutes away from Ozona, the truck Keith had been driving and extended family members was involved in a spectacular flying through the air wreck into another vehicle. Luckily, the other driver survived. However, when others came upon the scene, Keith or whoever the driver had been was not inside the truck. He was never seen again. Extensive searches occurred, finding nothing except Keith's wallet inside the truck. There were reports of someone running away from the scene, but nothing could be 100% substantiated. The stats say that 1 in 250 U.S. drivers in the year 2022 were involved in a hit-and-run accident. And in the United States, there are on average 800,000 hit-and-run crashes every year. Yes, that many. A crazy number. Contemplate how those gargantuan stats might influence your opinions on disappearances after car wrecks. while you also try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, if Keith were driving during the second wreck, what could have been going on with him to wreck twice in 2 weeks? Number 2, how do you explain Keith's phone not being used at all during the drive that night, whether he was driving or not? And number 3, if Keith were driving, what was he doing that night so far from his job? Keith's family is undecided on what happened, given that there is the possibility that Keith might not have been driving. The guest for this episode is Keith's mother, Charmin. Unfound news. I sent Steve Pankey another letter this past week after watching the show Girl on the Milk Carton from 2024 again. I have it DVR'd. Please find it on a streaming service. Next, if you'd like my level-headed, experienced, educated insight into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, you can find it on the last couple of live show episodes on YouTube. Finally, yes, as you heard at the beginning of this episode, I'm ready to start my consultation service. You can find the description and instructions at missingpersonsconsulting.com. A note before the interview starts. This past weekend, when I did this interview, I had a somewhat serious sinus infection. So you will hear me blowing my nose in the background during this talk. I apologize. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the mother of Keith Roberson, Charmin. Charmin, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and energy and including me in your podcast.
You're very welcome. We're doing this interview, everybody should know, on February 15th of 2026, the day after Valentine's Day. And I think I need to start here. Of course, Keith's official birth name is Stephen Keith Roberson, but for today's conversation, we're using the name Keith. That is what he went by in his everyday life. And maybe we should start right there, Charmin. And of course, welcome to this episode. Why was his name Keith, and why didn't people call him Stephen, his first name? Maybe you could explain that, and we'll go from there.
So Keith was named after 2 different people, a dear friend of mine and his dad's, and that's where Stephen came from. And then my son's father's name is Keith, and that's also his middle name. Right. And both of us just preferred the name Keith, and so that's it, literally. Though I called him Monkey, and that's when he worked in the oil field. A friend of mine hired him and knew that's what I called him, and so that is what his rig name ended up being, Monkey.
Monkey, so, but that's not on his birth. That's not on his birth certificate, right, Charmin?
No.
Okay. All right. So, was that maybe a decision? Of course, he gets named before he even knows what names are, and at some point, did he make the decision to be called Keith, or was that the adults in his life that made that decision?
Yeah, it was his dad and I.
His dad. Okay, so you had Stephen there, and then at some point, you know what? We're just going to use the middle name instead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, maybe we need to talk about the rest of your family. I mean, how many other kids do you have? Boys, girls? Let's talk about them too.
So I was an only child, and my parents had me very late in life. Mother was 42 when I was born, and my dad was 46, and Keith was an only child. Later, his dad remarried, and he had step-siblings, but those were kind of always a short term. His father has been married 4 times, and so just kind of short term relationships, I guess, because of his frequency of marriage. But I grew up on one side of Waco, on the west side of Waco, and met his dad, and I guess in the early 90s. and moved to the area where his dad was from, and I opted, of course, to stay there because on his dad's side of the family, he had a large family. He had siblings. They had kids, and Keith was able to grow up around his father's family.
Yeah. Okay. How do you think Keith felt about being an only child? Everybody knows by this time I was raised an only child, but I ended up meeting my biological brothers and sister eventually in 1994. But how did he feel about being an only child?
I don't think it bothered him. He and I were very close, and so Mom was his fixer, his confidant. He told me everything. I always said, if you don't want to know, don't ask Keith, because he's going to tell you. And so he was spoiled in some ways, but also because I've worked since a very young age and worked hard and had to work. And so I tried to instill that in him. And so he had, even though he was a little spoiled by me and my parents, he also had an amazing work ethic and was a grateful and appreciative person.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about his personality, his hobbies, interests. Was he into sports, hunting and fishing, cars? You know, what were some of his pursuits as maybe a teenager going into his 20s?
Right. So Keith went to work in high school, and he worked at the local golf course, and he was a caddy, and he tended to the carts and distributing those, taking those back in, cleaning them, picking up trash, and all of the things there. And then in high school, he also was offered, and I work in the oil field and have those relationships in the oil field. It's a big family. And Keith was approached, I was approached first by actually a customer, but, you know, also a friend. And he was doing some maintenance on some old wells around Corsicana, Texas. And he brought Keith in kind of as a helper. And it was an amazing relationship, and it kind of gave Keith an idea of what goes on in the oil field and maintaining old wells. And he kind of, like me, just dove in to that and wanted to learn all about the oil field. And, of course, in the oil field, you know, it's known for high pay. Of course, you're not at home a lot. You kind of have to have that mentality, but Keith embraced it, and so that was his first job. And he wasn't even, I don't think, when he started, really of legal age. He was just kind of paid cash and went in on the weekends and as needed. And then his first job was he went into the oil field on a rig, and I believe he was 18 when he worked on a. But he loved dirt bikes in high school, or even before high school. I think he was in junior high when we bought his first dirt bike. And we would go to the racetrack, and he would enter races and did very well. And then, you know, graduated from a smaller dirt bike to a bigger one. And then when Keith got a taste of oil field money, you know, he loved big, nice trucks, expensive toys, you know.
What Texas guy doesn't, right, Charmin? What Texas guy doesn't?
Exactly. You know, nice truck, big stereo system. Yes. You know, all of the bells and whistles that you can add to your vehicle to make it look nice. The big tires, the shiny rims, and
the Lone Star State flag, you know, hanging out the back. Yep. Yes. Right.
Exactly. He also enjoyed where my parents are from. Like I said, around the west side of the Waco area, there's a lake there, and Keith enjoyed going to the lake swimming. He was an amazing swimmer. You know, we didn't own a boat, but occasionally we would rent one at the lake and spend the weekend at the lake, and he enjoyed that too. He enjoyed fishing. My parents were fishermen as well, and so he loved that. But really, The thing I could say most about is his relationships with his friends and the time he spent with his friends. Keith was a good friend to everyone, and he being around people, and he was kind of a quiet guy, but he always wanted to be surrounded by his family and his friends.
Did he have, were his friends, like around his age, let's say, also in the oil fields, or were they doing different things? What were they doing?
Really, some of them did go into the oil fields. In the area in which Keith grew up, in the early 2000s, there was a play of oil, or gas, actually, in that area where the oil field, we were surrounded by it. XTO and several of the major oil field companies or operators were drilling in that area. And so a lot of the young men did come out of high school and go directly into the oil field.
Right. Because once again, the money, and you don't have to spend money on a higher education, or trade or anything like that. You can go right into the oil fields right from high school.
Exactly. And Keith was very smart, but he was never the guy. We always knew, I think, that he wasn't going to go and get a white-collar job or go into college. He was going to be a hands-on, hard-working, blue-collar guy.
Yeah. Okay. What about, so he's turning 18, he goes to work in the oil fields. He's living, I guess, by himself out there, right from 18 years old? That's what was going on?
So we always, and it worked out really well. In 2012, Keith graduated in 2010 from Teague High School in Teague, Texas. And he went, to work on a rig, and I believe they were drilling around South Texas, and he was actually in South Texas, south of San Antonio.
Wow.
When I ended up in 2012 moving to that area. And so Keith was down there working, and I moved as well. So we were in that area. Later, the plays switch and move, and where everybody goes ends up is kind of all in the same area, where drilling is prominent. And so I ended up in West Texas, and later so did Keith. And so we were kind of always, not that we lived together, because Keith's job was a lot different. I'm a sales representative in the oil field, and so I own my own home, but Keith was more nomadic in the sense of he was working on locations, and so he was either in a hotel, his company would put him in a hotel, or on location in housing on location. And so he would go to work. His last jobs, or he kind of switched from the drilling side to completions, and the job title was flowback, and they're literally just cleaning out the well after they drill the well. And Keith had become later at the time of when he went missing, he was a supervisor, but he always lived close to the well, close to where he was working, or on location itself.
Okay. What about relationships? Do you have any kids, girlfriends? What can you say about that?
No, Keith had never been married, and so no children. Although in the relationships that he had, his girlfriends were mainly like long-term girlfriends. He didn't like just hop around from girl to girl. He would get into a relationship, and normally those relationships lasted for a period of time.
Okay. All right, but no kids.
No children.
No kids. And any of these women, did he live with any of these women? Of course, he was somewhat nomadic. Maybe this was a woman living somewhere else. They weren't living together. What can you say?
No. Really, there was hardly a way for him to be able to do that because of his job. Whenever he'd be called to location, it would be at the start of a job, and then that could last from 1 month to even 3 to 6 months.
Right.
And so he worked 12 hours a shift, and then there's a guy that would relieve him for the other 12 hours of the day. And you're expected to be there. And so he would normally, when they would get released, is what they call it, from the location, from the well, after the job completed, that is when he would get some time off. And, he would spend that some days, mostly he would always come to me. But then he might go back home for a few days. He might go see his dad for a few days, and so it would really make it difficult for him to have a relationship where he lived with someone, or even getting married. You're just working in the oil field, you're never home.
Right. Okay. Would you say you like the oil business? I know he was making a lot of money. Would that was something that you think, if of course he doesn't go missing, is that something he's still doing today? Could you see him doing that into his 50s, 60s? What would you say?
He had a long-term plan, yes. He loved the oil field. He wanted to learn. And his goal was to become what they call a completion superintendent. So that would be the guy that works for the operator, who would be over the locations and over all of the work. And so he had when he went missing, he had recently been named as a supervisor for the company he worked for. But he had bigger plans, to learn more, to learn all aspects of completions, and to move up into a role where he was actually working for a major or an operator that actually, drilled the wells. And so that was a huge goal for him, and he talked about it often. He was very excited about his future.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Now, I think, of course, we've gotten to know his job pretty well. Of course, we're going to come back to his job eventually. But I do have to ask you about, of course, it did come up in a prior conversation, is that Keith did have some problems with the law. I don't want to get way deep into this, but I think we need to discuss it. How did that all come about?
So, in Keith's high school years, he dabbled, and of course, I think the first thing was alcohol, and then some marijuana, and then later into harder drugs. And I was aware, and just, dropping all the time if I felt like, there were issues, and he'd kind of straighten right up. But Keith was a functional addict,
okay.
And I don't know necessarily the extent of his addiction. Maybe I was in some way blocking and enabling, and I'll own that if that's what I was. In retrospect,
okay.
You look back at what every mother does. What could I have done different,
Yeah, right.
And so, was it a huge problem? No, not in my point of view, because the kid got up and went to work, went to school, was very smart, and wasn't late, and he was responsible, and took care of things that needed to be tended to, of his responsibilities. So, but I do know of, him dabbling, and I think later it became a bigger problem for him, especially around the time that he went missing.
Did you ever talk to him? What do you have to say about him? Have you ever had a one-on-one with him, and did he ever try rehab? What were the attempts to maybe try to get him sober?
So, during his high school years, we did reach out and schedule appointments with a therapist. He didn't like to go, and I guess, number one, being male, and number two, just, I guess at that time, more so than now, just the stigma of what does that mean, or what does that look like, going to a therapist. It's not as, back then, it wasn't, I guess, as common as it is today. Mental health wasn't, as the awareness of it wasn't as prominent as it is today. And, we had talked about, do you need to go into a rehab facility? No, Mom, I'm okay. I'm not doing anything, really bad or dealing drugs, or, I'm just on the weekends, I go out with my friends and we party, but I'm still like, that's not okay, but, in retrospect, of course, I would have definitely gone to extremes to nip that in the bud. Mm-hmm. And then, just because he was so responsible in other aspects that you're just like, okay, I don't see it really affecting you. Do I like it? No. Do I wish it wasn't going on? Yes. But then, too, what do you do other than hog time, and just micromanage. But in retrospect, I, of course, knowing what I know now and what we've been through here, I would have certainly taken that more seriously.
Okay. So how did this all end up then in, of course, having an addiction doesn't necessarily get you sent to jail, but how did he end up with the jail time? I guess he got caught with possession, or what happened?
So my dad, and I had mentioned that my parents had me very late in life. Mm-hmm. And so my dad was 90 years old in 2013, and we got the call. He literally got sick with pneumonia, went into the hospital in 2 weeks. I believe he's in the hospital about a week, maybe 10 to 14 days, maybe 2 weeks. And they called, and they had decided that he was just kind of too far gone. And we as a family, my mother, Keith, and I decided to bring him home, and the doctors, of course. And so when that happened, Keith was working, I believe, around the San Angelo area. And I called and told him, look, we're bringing Dad home for hospice. And, of course, at that point in time with hospice, we knew he was pretty sick, and we knew that this was the end for him. Yeah. But you don't know when that's actually going to happen. And so I actually called his boss, who was a friend of, Oldfield. We all know everybody. It's a family. And told his boss, hey, this is what's going on, and can he be released from the well from work, come home, because his granddad's going to pass, and they were very close. And so Keith was actually on his way home. I don't know if he was in a hurry, upset. I'm sure he was upset, of course. But he got pulled over on his way to my parents' home, and was caught in possession, I believe, of methamphetamine, and put in jail. And I knew he was coming in late that day, and I woke up the next morning and he wasn't there. And so I started calling his boss and everyone, and he had reached out to his boss, and his boss told me, he's been incarcerated. So I left. And it was actually the day that they were bringing my dad home that afternoon, and I left, and I didn't. It was hard enough, and my parents were elderly. My mother was 4 years younger than my dad, so she's 86 at this time, and I didn't say anything to them about what had happened to Keith. Just let's don't add, not that I wasn't trying to be transparent about it or dishonest. It was, I didn't want to lay that on them. And so I went and got him, and they had impounded the truck, and we had to go through all that mess and brought him back home. And so then he was sentenced to probation for that charge later. And on probation, you're asked to come to appointments, do your analysis, take classes, and all of the things. And with Keith's job, it just became increasingly difficult to have to take off, find relief, inconvenience the company. And not that I'm trying to say that he shouldn't do the things that he was required to do to fulfill the obligation of probation, but it was very difficult to keep the job. And you got to have the job to pay the fees and the fines and all of the things, but it became increasingly difficult for him and for his company to keep covering him for the obligations. So he literally asked his probation officer and the district attorney of that county, I can't do this. Let me go ahead and go to prison. Wow. Get my time over with, and so I can come back and focus on my job. And he didn't get revoked. He asked to have his probation pulled, and let me go ahead and go. And so he was sentenced to 15 months at state jail. Or I don't know exactly what his sentence was. Really, in state jail, you have to do day for day. But he did 15 months in state jail.
When was it? What year? What years were this? Did this happen? What year?
So, 2016, in the or maybe the end of 2015. I know he was released in September of 2017.
Okay, so he would have 15 months would have started in the summer of like 2016. And went the whole way to the fall of 2017.
Yes.
Did he? Was that a surprise to you, or did he talk that over with you? Did he let you and any of his family know that he was going to do this, go to jail, or what?
Yes, he did. He told me of his decision, and I was devastated. Really, more so for what that meant with the conviction and prison time.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, in some ways, in the oil field, it is not an area of employment where a felony or any drug charge or any charge other than maybe assaults or physical violence can prohibit you or will prohibit you from being a part of that or from obtaining a job. And so as far as the job goes, we knew he was safe, but we didn't. I was just concerned about what does this look like for your future, and I know why you're wanting to do this, and in some ways I agreed with him because it was tedious to follow all of the obligations of probation, but I was concerned for his future and what did it look like with that charge in the prison sentence, the stigma of that, and what could that hinder it for his future.
All right. Did you go visit him while he was in jail? How'd he do in jail?
So he was very blessed in a sense to go to a facility in Jacksboro, Texas that was, number one, air conditioned. Most Texas prisons are not air conditioned, and so through the summer months, it's very difficult. There's actually deaths associated with the heat in Texas and the prisons not being air conditioned. And it was a unit that was not full of hardened criminals for, I guess, accelerated charges, amplified charges, harder charges. And he actually developed some relationships there that became influential, and also some negative relationships that carried on out of there. But with some guys that really older gentlemen that kind of took him under their wing. I don't think that was a prison that there was lots of fighting, and the hierarchy wasn't so common as maybe other penitentiary settings. So his time there wasn't as horrible as it could have been had he been sent to another unit.
All right. Did you go see him? How did anybody else go see him? Friends go see him? I don't know if they still talk on the phones through the clear glass or something, or what. But you did that.
I would go see him, and at the time I lived just a couple of hours south of Jacksboro, and I would go see him just as often as I possibly could, at least every 2 weeks. And the visits were physical visits. You weren't through the glass. You would sit across the table. There's vending machines in there. You could take change and grab something to eat and drink, and you would have a 2-hour visit, which was very nice to be able to have, not drive 2 hours for 15 minutes or 30 minutes. Right. You actually got to spend some time. And what was notable about his time and our relationship is that not one time, not one moment at all, ever, in 15 months, did he ever gripe about. He knew he created the situation, and he knew that was on him, and he knew what it did to me. And so he didn't eat not one time. He never asked me for a thing. I kept him in money for, because the food there isn't, it's like hospital food, I guess. And they don't feed you a lot of it. And so I kept him in commissary and clothing and all of the things that you can have as privileges while in prison, which isn't much. But, and then I allowed him to call as often as he wanted, and I would go see him, but he never asked for a thing and never griped.
What did he do? What did he do while he was in prison? Did he do a lot of reading, or did he? I mean, what was he? How was he doing? How was he passing his time for those over a year?
I believe he did do some reading. Keith never liked books and all of that, but I guess when you're thrown into a situation where you have absolutely nothing to do, right. I did do some reading. I know they played cards a lot, maybe dominoes, just, really talking, just with his fellow inmates. I believe he was in a unit where there were 48 people. So it wasn't a large facility, or the facility was just large, but the dorms were not. And so I believe he actually obtained, they're allowed, it's called a job there, but I believe he worked in the kitchen for a while there, but really the guys just came up with things, playing games and even making up games, I think, to pass the time.
All right, so he's in there for all the time, and I guess while he was in there, he of course we know drugs get into prisons, but did he clean his act up as far as his addiction?
When he came home, he had a plan. And, of course, prison's going to affect anyone. I think some more than others. And I think literally that he was pretty appalled at himself that he had gotten himself, let himself get into that situation. And so he had a plan, and he went to work 9 days after his release. And so reaching out to those oil field connections, and actually reached out to the young man who had trained him, who he had worked with prior, and had trained him to do the flowback job. And the young man put him to work 9 days after, and he said, I'm going to stay working until I can purchase a vehicle. I am not. So I believe they gave him a vehicle to drive. And really, you don't have to drive. Maybe from well to well. But when you go out to a location, like, you're just there. You're there until the job is over. And by the time you work a 12-hour shift, you don't want to go anywhere anyway. But to go to town and get groceries maybe tend to paying bills or, financial obligations, just all of the things that we have to do, the errands we have to run. He was allowed, that. And he worked from September. He went to work in October after he was released, September of 2017, and in December of that year, he literally didn't have a day off, and he put $12,000 down on a 2016 Chevrolet 3/4 ton.
All right.
He sold, No,
So
actually,
he's getting back on his feet after spending over a year in jail.
Yes.
And he's
yes.
doing. And it sounds to me he's doing better than most people who go to jail and get back out. I mean, how many of them are buying a new vehicle with their own money they just earned after getting out of jail? That seems to me to be pretty rare.
Yes, he was embracing it. He loved the people he was working with, loved his job, and just, after getting out of jail and then working that amount of time, he didn't even care. He was just like, I'm going to dive in, and he did, and advanced in that company pretty quickly.
Okay.
Because of his dedication and just trying to overcome and do better.
Okay. All right, so everybody understands that. It's very important because we'll probably come back to at least a little bit of that later. Let's move on to this. His father, of course, you two are not married anymore, but his father, and we just want to go through the generalities of it. We'll get deeper into it later. But how did his father come to work with Keith in the oil fields? When did that happen? How did that happen? What did you think about that?
It was only about a month, and it might have been two. I don't quite remember, and I don't even know that Keith didn't call me and say, "Hey, I just hired my dad." So that in Keith's younger years, my relationship with his dad was okay. Keith, we never did the whole on Friday at 6:00. You're going to pick him up, and he better be back Sunday at 6. If Keith wanted to go to his dad's, we lived close enough. He called his dad and said, "I want to come over. I want to spend the weekend with you," or "Hey, what are you doing on a school night?" Even
Right.
And they would get together and make that happen, and just let me know, "Hey, I want to go to my dad's. I'm going to my dad's. Okay, when are you coming home?" And that kind of thing. So we weren't real strict on that. If he wanted to see his dad, he could see his dad. But later, Keith was an adult at this time, and so he was 26 when he went missing, and so I wasn't involved in that relationship. That was their own. They could communicate whenever they wanted to, but it had only been a short time that Keith and Keith had become supervisor, so he employed his dad. He basically hired him, and I remember the supervisor saying, "Well, everything kind of went south when his dad came to work there." And
all right, we'll get into that later. I just want to know the step by step A, step B, step C, step D to his father getting. Did his father ask him for a job? Did Keith ask him to come work for him? Did the father have prior experience working in the oil field? Like all that.
His experience wasn't his dad's experience was not as elevated, I guess, as this job.
Okay.
I think he had dabbled in some things, but no. And so I believe that his dad probably was unemployed and reached out to Keith.
Okay. And Keith would have been in the position to hire. He had enough power within this company to hire people on his own.
Yes. I'm sure he had to run that through his supervisor as well.
Okay.
And, take the application or have his dad reach out to his supervisor to get that approved. But I think Keith probably presented that, yes.
Okay. And so what you're also saying, though, is the father had only worked there maybe a month before Keith disappeared?
Yes.
That's all the longer it was, about a month. That's all it was.
Yes.
Okay. Just when you found out that your ex-husband, his father, was going to be working with Keith, do you think that was a positive? Your own opinion on it, how did you view it? A positive, a negative, no opinion at all?
I knew that his dad had not been doing well physically in his health.
I guess we'll just keep this very simple. Your opinion, you were a little leery of this.
I was leery of it because I wasn't certain of his dad making good choices at the time as well. I was concerned about his dad's influence and what that might mean.
Okay, did you talk to Keith about this? Did you voice your opinion on it? Did you two talk about it? Of course.
Yes.
Did you? And
Yes.
what was the conversation?
He didn't like that. He didn't like
Okay, so you brought that up and Keith dismissed it.
Yeah. Yes, he
Okay.
dismissed it.
All right. And were they actually living together once this all happened for this month? Were they living together? Were they living close by to each other? Explain that.
So Keith was living in an RV on location that he and I owned together. So he was trying to develop a side business in addition to his flowback job, and so he had bought an RV in what we call a combo unit in the oil field, and a combo unit provides electricity and water to the RV in a remote location where there isn't hookups for the RV. And so that the one he was living in was his first purchase, and we in the oil field, it's common, to have this equipment on, housing, and we call them surface rentals, but light plants and things. And so he had purchased the RV in that combo unit, but then rented it back. So he was making money off of the housing of his own housing. He rented it back to his company and was making a day rate on that unit. So because his dad, when he hired his dad, his dad's wife wanted to go with him, and I guess they didn't want to be apart and weren't used to that in his previous jobs. So they rented a hotel in Ozona, Texas, which is the location was 15 miles north of Ozona, and they were staying in a hotel, husband and wife, right there in Ozona. So they weren't far from Keith, but no, they were not living in the same housing.
Okay. All right, so they were not living together, and in fact, they weren't even living close to each other. Like you said, he was living 15 miles from the location, from the drill site.
Yes.
Okay. All right. We will certainly as probably everybody can tell, we're certainly going to come back to that. So Keith's father is working for Keith, and this had been going on for a month before Keith disappeared. Let's go to this. Of course, we talked about Keith buying this truck in November, December of the year before. But he wrecked that truck, didn't he?
He did.
Explain that truck. Of course, you weren't there, but explain what happened and the aftermath of it.
Okay. 2 weeks before the accident where he wrecked a different vehicle and went missing,
yes,
he had come to Odessa, not to see me. He had a little girl he was seeing, and he had I'm sure gotten off work in the evening, drove to Odessa, which is where I was, but like I said, he didn't come see me. I didn't even know he'd gone to Odessa that night, so to see this girl, and had left in the wee hours of the morning. And so that trip from Odessa back down to Ozona is around 3 hours, and through very dark country roads, not major highways, and so I'm assuming that he fell asleep and he had passed an 18-wheeler and clipped the tire.
Wow. And
so he's in a 2016 3/4-ton Dodge and clipped the rear tire wheels of a vacuum. It was an 18-wheeler in what we call a vacuum truck or a water truck in the oil field. And the police were called, of course, because the vehicle he clipped was, a commercial vehicle. Yeah. And they, his truck was not drivable. In fact, it was totaled. And, but he, and I didn't find out about it until the next day. or really the same day, because of course it was the wee hours of the morning. And, I urged him to, just go get checked out. He had declined medical assistance at the wreck site. And so he was around Big Lake, Texas, which is really kind of closer to Ozona from rather than Odessa. And he did call his dad, who I believe came and picked him up and took him back down to the job location. And then called and told me, and we called the insurance company, and I told him, I just wish you would go to a doctor or go into the ER and just get checked out for a concussion or whatever. And he refused. He said, "I'm okay, Mom."
So he was the cause of the wreck?
Yes.
It was his fault? Okay, but any allegations that he was speeding? Any allegations that he was drinking and driving? Any allegations that he might have been high and driving? Any of that?
No.
Zero.
We just that he fell asleep.
Okay. How far, you said it was like a 3-hour drive, how far into this drive did this happen?
Probably 2 hours.
All right, so 2 hours into a 3-hour drive after working all day, and easy to understand, fell asleep at the wheel. Of course, police did show up. He was there. He didn't flee the scene or anything, correct?
No.
Okay. And you eventually did talk to him about the wreck, and he just said, "You know what? I fell asleep behind the wheel," but we do have to note that he never did get checked out. I mean, did the truck flip over? Did the airbags go off? How bad was it?
Yes, the airbags went off. The truck did
Wow.
not flip. Major damage to the vehicle. He had the ugliest bumper I've ever seen, and I believe it was. I hate to say this, but it was an Iron Cross brand, and it was painted the same color as the truck, which was white. But it's just not that it was so ugly; it was just large. Big metal bumper, kind of like the ranch, similar to the Ranch Hand brand. And I told him, if you purchase another pickup, you got to get the same ugly bumper, please, because I felt like a heavy bumper saved him and saved the truck from further damage. Probably, kept it from, coming into the cab, maybe from hitting an H, of course.
All right, so he's in this wreck, falls asleep at the wheel, hits the back of a 18-wheeler, totals his truck, airbags go off. No charges against him. It's just simply his fault. Fell asleep at the wheel. Nobody has made any allegations otherwise. And what does he do to replace that truck?
So we were, of course, waiting on the insurance company to, send an adjuster out. The truck was, taken to a salvage or an impound or whatever yard. And so we were waiting on the assessment and results and, are they going to total it? What are they going to do here? What are we looking at money-wise?
Right.
And all of that. And so his I believe his father's wife at the time had driven a vehicle down. Now, it wasn't hers, but it was Keith's dad's sister's boyfriend's.
Wow.
And so the wife had an additional vehicle. So my ex-husband had his truck that he would take back and forth to work.
Yeah.
And then she had driven and this truck was it was a 2004 half-ton Chevrolet. And I believe that she had just borrowed that just to go down and be able to, because they were a one-car family at the time. And so she had borrowed that, whenever, so that, he's working 12-hour days, Keith's dad, and so she's stuck at the hotel to give her transportation to go eat and tend to errands and all. And so whenever they had that wreck, the truck was then offered to Keith not that he was leaving location a whole lot, but, so that he could go get groceries. And so that was, I guess the whole family had decided that, or asked permissions, I'm not sure, that it would be okay if Keith drove, this guy's truck until we could replace his.
Okay. And we do know sometimes, of course, with your rental or your insurance company, they do offer rentals. But this is not what Keith did. He chose to borrow this other truck.
Yes, yes. Right. And I guess just, where they were working is it's in the hill country of Texas. And so, but it's very remote, I don't even that there's probably he probably would have had to go all the way to San Antonio to find like an Enterprise Rentals or a rental car agency, and it was just convenient that truck was there, and it wasn't, Brandy wasn't working, the wife wasn't working at the time, and didn't have to be somewhere, at a certain time. But, Keith did. And so, even though he was living on location, they just opted to allow him to use it until the truck was going to be replaced, of course. And we weren't looking at a very long time frame for that, we thought.
Okay. And most importantly, this is the truck that eventually was the wreck. This was the truck that was wrecked that led to the disappearance, correct?
Yes.
All right, that's the truck. This truck that we are now discussing, everyone. The truck, not the truck he bought right after he got out of jail, but the one that he borrowed, I guess, or was allowed to use after he wrecked the other truck. This is the one that got wrecked on the night or the night of his disappearance. All right. So, just some questions. Now that we've gone through all of that, in your opinion, of course, the year before he was in jail, but in 2018 he's working, he's making money, he's doing these things. Just in general, how do you think Keith was doing in the year 2018?
I had thought that, especially since the time that his dad had started working with him, I was starting to get concerned about Keith, thinking, these trips to see this girl, late nights, I get it that if you're working 12-hour days and you're on location for months on end, how that can get, just wear on you, just kind of being stuff and just work. And so, and him being a young man, also wanting to have a social life. But, I was concerned that, how is he working 12 hours a day? How is he driving half the night to see this girl? And two, we talked every day, every single day. And just that kind of wasn't, his calls weren't as frequent. He was kind of evasive about, hey, what you got going on, and just, but too, we were both very busy. I didn't think a whole lot of that because we were both very busy at the time. The oil field was busy. We both had, jobs. Keith's at this point a grown man, and so, but I had concerns and had started to wonder, I wonder if he's using again. I was worried. And then, of course, after that wreck, I didn't get to lay eyes on him after I wanted to go down, and he was like, Mom, I'm okay. I didn't get to lay eyes on him after the first wreck, and so I needed that, and I was just concerned and worried, and those thoughts had started crossing my mind about if there was new drug use.
All right, I have to ask, this other, this woman that he was going to see, how did he even meet her?
So he had a friend, and I believe that this was also someone that he had met in prison. And this guy had like a girl pen pal, and she had a friend. So this is another person. This is another jail, a relationship, and this girl had been incarcerated. And so, of course, I wasn't thrilled with that. No mom wants. That wouldn't be any mom's choice, And I, had met her and wasn't necessarily a fan. I'm sorry, but it's just how I felt.
That's fine.
And I was concerned about, just even her appearance, and just she looked like someone who, any mom wouldn't pick this for their child. I was concerned about the relationship. I was concerned about what it meant. I was concerned if she used drugs. So, in knowing that she had in the past, and so you put two people together that have a history of drug use, and where is that going to go?
That's true. It's not overtly positive.
Right.
All right. So he met her through some other guy who had another woman on the outside, and this was the friend of this woman on the outside.
Yes.
All right. And how long, just in months, were they a couple all of 2018? How often were they seeing each other? Do you even know?
Probably about 3 months.
All right, about 3 months. So the summer, maybe the beginning of the summer of 2018. Okay.
Yeah.
And you did say though you saw him after the first truck wreck, but how often were you talking to him? And of course, we'll eventually get to the last phone call you had with him. But how often were you talking to him?
At least every other day, if not every day. It wasn't. I don't think as the conversations weren't as frequent as they had been in the past. But too, I also chalked that up to, where his location was, his signal, and during the days I'm often in areas without a signal to this day. We work in the oil field, you work remotely, you're just out in the middle of nowhere where they're drilling. And so oftentimes, there aren't, it's impossible to communicate. But still, we talked frequently. I can't remember if it at that point was daily. I know I talked to him the day before he went missing and the day that he did go missing. And so it was still, pretty often.
Okay. Anybody, of course, like you said, you you already thought that his father working with him was not the greatest idea, but did anybody voice any concerns to you before he went missing about what was going on with Keith?
Not before he went missing. I think that everyone analyzed it more so after,
Right.
and the things said after the fact, maybe, everybody's so busy. And, even if they had thought it, would it be appropriate to call mom and let her in on it, especially if it was guys that he's working with? And literally his, at that point in time, his communication and the people he was surrounded with were his coworkers, and so a lot of them I didn't know, met after he went missing, but, I don't think so.
All right, so once again, you had your personal concern, maybe just based on the father, but nobody was calling you, messaging you, saying, "Hey, I saw Keith, and there was something about him that worried me." Anything like that?
No.
Okay. And also, question, of course, we know that he was making these drives down to see this woman. We're going to, of course, have to come back to that. But was he inclined to go on drives just by himself to clear his head or anything like that?
No, not that I know of.
All right, let's move up to that day of the disappearance. Of course, you spoke to him later that day, but what do you understand about earlier that day? Of course, he has his father's wife's truck. I guess he worked that day, but what do you know about the timeline of that day?
So that evening, I talked to Keith at 6:31, and I believe at that time we call them towers, or his hitch, his daily routine was a 12-hour shift, and I believe he had just gotten off at 6. I believe it was 6 to 6 that he was working. So I talked to him at 6:31 p.m.
Okay.
And So going back a little bit to that girlfriend, I think there had been some fraudulent activity, or his debit card was missing, and we had canceled his debit card. And so he, at that time, there wasn't Cash App and Venmo and all of the ways that we can send money to each other now. And so he had called, and he was about to, his check was about to hit on that Friday, or maybe even the next day, but he was running low on cash and wanted to go to town and eat, I think, and he had reached out to me, and I'm like, well, I don't know how in the world, unless I just drove down there right now, and it's 6:30 at night, I've got to work the next day. This was a Wednesday. And I said, why don't you, because I knew his dad. I didn't know about his dad's financials, of course, but I'm thinking if your dad can afford to stay in a hotel and with his wife, then surely they're prepared, or he'd been there long enough to receive at least one, maybe probably even 2 checks, and that, he probably had cash, of course. I mean, they've got to live. And so I said, why don't you just borrow some from your dad, and I'll get it back to your dad, or you can get it back to your dad when your check hits, or whatever. And he said, okay, I'm going to go to Dad's room and ask him for some money. And his dad said that he never did come.
All right, we're going to come back to that. Why did he need money right at that moment, did he say?
He didn't necessarily give me I need to specifically buy this. I just assumed he needed groceries or dinner for that night, or food, enough cash to get him by just until, for drinks, and he smoked, so cigarettes, food, whatever, daily stuff, until he got his check on Friday. He didn't, he wasn't asking for $1,000. He was just asking for, enough money to get by.
Regarding this debit card fraudulent issue, did anybody ever get to the bottom of that? Did he express to you an idea how that even happened?
He felt like that the girlfriend who I think the last time he saw her was the night of the first wreck, where he wrecked his own pickup on the way back from Odessa in the wee hours of the morning. I believe that he felt like she had either taken his card or she had gotten the number and was maybe trying to make some purchases without his consent. And so I do remember helping him or guiding him through canceling that card.
A nice girl then. Right? Now, let's be clear. Let's be clear. That's what you suspect. That was your conversation. Was that ever proven?
I don't think it was pursued afterwards.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because of his age,
Okay, but we're just being clear. No, she or anybody else has never answered for this fraudulent charge on his credit card.
No.
Okay, but your suspicion, your talk with Keith before he went missing, was the suspicion, the theory that she was responsible for it.
Yes.
Okay, that's all. Just have to make sure that that's just somebody's opinion. We don't exactly know what happened. Because it was never pursued because he went missing.
Right.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure, but it's something. Here he is. Because, if you're a person living out like in a city like I do, and you go out and you go to Publix, which is our grocery store chain here, or you buy gas or whatever, they have those swipers, those illegal swipers, and, but it's hard to imagine how somebody's card, if the guy is working out in the middle of nowhere, how it gets to be that his card's being used somewhere, right?
Exactly.
It's right. So it's a very limited number of people who could have been using it in a fraudulent way.
Yes.
Right? Okay, so that's also, I think, what we're saying here. Okay, so you did, though, talk to him that evening. He asked you for money, but you couldn't figure out how to get to him. He was supposed to go to his father to ask him for money, and we'll come back to this again, but we're just going to state it. According to the father, Keith never did that.
Right.
Okay. Now, he did, though, have a conversation with another friend that evening. We do not have to use the friend's name, but it was like you told me it was like a 7-minute conversation. Let's talk about that.
Okay, so at 7:38 p.m., so Keith's phone was on my plan at the time. Mm-hmm. So we had AT&T.
Okay.
And Keith's phone was on my plan, so I do have his phone records from that time. And so at 7:38 p.m., he had a conversation, a 7-minute conversation with a young man that he knew for many years. I knew the young man as well. I know the young man's parents from back home. Okay. But also that young man my son had hired him as well, and that didn't work out. I think Keith had stated, that the young man just didn't grasp the concept. He couldn't wrap his head around what was going on location. Just, some people get it, some people don't. Okay. And so he was let go from the company. But two, this is a young man who he's done prison time, been in and out of jail for many years. I remember having conversations with his mother about his behavior, when both of the boys were younger. And so I did later, of course, contact this young man and say, hey, I have the phone records and you talked to Keith right before he went missing. What was that conversation about? Oh, we were talking about work. Well, if he's candy.
Let's not say if he's. We're not here to get into whether he's telling the truth or not.
Right.
All right. All we're saying, he said that they talked about work for 7 minutes.
Yes.
That's what he's saying. So, and Keith called him.
No. It was an incoming call.
Okay, so this friend called Keith.
Yes.
All right, and they talked for 7 minutes. And being that you have the phone records, when was the last time were these two talking frequently, like every day, every week, every month? Do you even remember looking at you don't have to do it now, but just in general, what can you say?
Yeah, I do remember that, and it wasn't daily, I don't think. I think they were in contact, but I don't think they were talking daily.
Okay. All right, so the conversation, he says, was about work, and it was for 7 minutes. Is there any way to tell, was Keith already on the road at that point, or was Keith still at his RV at the work site at the time of this call?
I do not know where he was at that time. Like I said, I had talked to him at 6:31 p.m. Mm-hmm. This was at 7:38 p.m. that conversation took place. And so the wreck was at 9:39 p.m.
So 2 hours later.
Yes, and so
I'll have to look at that, and I will. I'm going to do a map video for this. I will map that out for everybody and see if that all makes sense or not. So they have this conversation. It's an incoming call, 7:38 p.m. They talk for 7 minutes, I guess, to 7:45. And according to the phone records, as best as you can tell, is that the last phone call or text that was made, either way, incoming or outgoing, on the phone?
There was one more call at 8 p.m., and that was from the owner of the company that Keith worked for, and it was just a 1-minute incoming call.
And am I guessing he didn't reach Keith or not? Your opinion, best as you can tell.
I do not know, and when I tried to get that information from the company, they would not discuss it.
I see. Okay, so maybe we'll come back to that as well. Let's now move on to, you've just brought it up, the wreck. So he has this call at 7:38, but at 9:39, this wreck happens, and like I said, I'm doing a map video, and I know it's tough to do directions and things with just audio, but the wreck happens far away from the work site. And in fact, he was headed away from the work site, not to the work site. Describe of course you weren't there, but describe as best you can what happened.
Okay, so the place where the wreck took place was about approximately 45 minutes from his work location. Mm-hmm. And so Ozona is on I-10 in Texas, in the hill country, in I-10, literally goes from El Paso to San Antonio, and Keith was headed towards San Antonio. So the next town over from Ozona is Sonora, and he had gone through Sonora and was 17 miles east going towards San Antonio of Sonora.
Right.
And I was told the next day that he had fallen asleep. The assumption was that he fell asleep. And so this, again, hill country. And so it's like if you had a hill and they made a highway through it, the median was raised. The median was a hill.
Yeah.
And he launched, evidently fell asleep, and the road, the vehicle exited the roadway, launched up the median, and he landed in the opposite lanes. It's a 4-lane highway, 2 on each side, in the opposite lanes on top of a car, of another vehicle.
Wow.
The truck then bounced off of that vehicle. So he's airborne.
Yeah.
You know, falls asleep, goes up a hill. I'm sure that woke him up, but he's airborne. And lands on top of another vehicle. Then his truck bounced off of that vehicle and went all the way across off of the roadway into, it wasn't a ditch, but it was, you know, just pretty even with the roadway, and landed in the middle, kind of a small field type setting. And then the other vehicle that he landed on ended up right next to the roadway.
But not near his. When the two cars came, the truck and this other vehicle came to rest, they were separated by. They weren't close, like 100, like a football field away, 100 yards or something.
Yes. Okay. They were pretty far apart. Yes.
Okay. And there were witnesses to this, besides, of course, the driver in the other car. There were other cars on the road at the time that witnessed this?
Yes. I later, and it was years later, that I was allowed to obtain a body cam video from a DPS office, from the DPS office, and there are 2 witnesses in that video that having a discussion with the DPS officer that worked the crash that night, and they had seen someone walking or running, I'm not sure which, away from the truck. And didn't have, it's so dark out there.
Yeah.
There's no spots. And they say they saw him flee, is the word I'm going to use. That's the word the police used, the scene. You know, of course, as a mother, your concern is, were they injured? Did they hit their head? Surely, just the crash and realizing what had happened is traumatic. Who knows what happened?
All I'm asking is, so there are witnesses. One truck, his truck is on the side of the road. The other vehicle's maybe farther down the road. Let's just say it was 100 yards. It very well could have been even farther than that. Of course, he's going to highway speed, 75, 80 miles an hour. You get hit. It's going to take a while before the other car stops. These witnesses, do they say they saw somebody walking away, running away from the truck that Keith was in?
Yes.
Okay. And I guess that they did not feel the need to track this person down. What did they say this person did? Ran down parallel to the highway, ran back into the median, ran off even farther off the road. What did they say?
In the video, there is a hand signal, and I believe it's confusing to watch because you don't really get a feel for which way this guy's pointing. Where are you standing to see? But I believe that he pointed back west.
back west. So going back
So the
towards Sonora,
opposite
pointing
way.
back toward Ozona where Keith had come from.
Yeah. Yes, not
Okay.
in the direction he was originally traveling.
Okay. All right. So let's just stop there for that. How quickly were the police on the scene? Were they in there? And I've obviously not seconds, been in 5 minutes, 15 minutes. Do you have any idea on that?
I would assume that I do not know where the DPS officer was when he was dispatched to the wreck.
Okay.
So I do believe he was first on scene. But if you're looking at Sonora and you're 17 miles from there, you know, the county, Sutton County Sheriff's Office, if those deputies, if the deputy was in town, you know, it would have taken him, you know, if he was traveling at a high rate of speed, at least 10 to 15 minutes to get there, you know.
Right.
Yeah. But I do not know exactly.
Okay.
I've never been to exactly when, you know, on the accident report, it gives the time of 9:39 as the crash time. So is that the time that they got there? How do you derive the crash times? I'm not certain.
Maybe from the witnesses, best as the witnesses could tell, maybe from the 911 call. You know, if somebody saw something, called in, maybe it might be that. You know.
It's so isolated and desolate also that I do know if the witnesses, I don't believe the witnesses saw the crash. I do believe they saw the aftermath.
All right. Okay, so... All right, so we're not sure. So then we're not sure if there were other witnesses to the actual crash. They might have just been arriving there in the aftermath of it.
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so. There was never any description from the witnesses of the wreck itself.
Okay.
Only that they saw something. I believe they drove up on it. And two, this area being so isolated. If I drove there today, it's not heavy traffic at all.
Right. Of course, yeah. This is not downtown New York City, of course.
No.
All right, so let me just go through it once again, just so I can explain this, being that I've looked at this on Google Maps and I haven't been to the location, but I've been there on Google Street View. So for some reason, which is still unknown, we're going to get into that too. Keith is going east on I-10 away from the work site. He's 45 minutes away from where he was living and working, going away from that location. For some reason, maybe fell asleep, maybe somebody ran him off the road, maybe avoided a deer or some sort of other animal on the roadway, pick one. He swerves left into the median, but there is a mound in the median because there's a hill there of where the road has been cut out of this hill to keep it flat. He goes up over this hill. It's like a ramp, like Evel Knievel or something. He goes up. The truck gets airborne, and I guess unfortunately for this other driver, this driver's coming the other way at the same time. And coincidentally, when the truck comes back down, it comes down on the top of this other vehicle. Keith's truck, with Keith in it, keeps going like in a northeast direction. The other car probably keeps going west, slides down. Keeps going sliding down the highway, and eventually they both come to rest far apart from each other. Right? That's essentially what happened, Charmin. Okay, and then either somebody or multiple people saw this wreck, or maybe it's even likely that nobody saw this, but then people come up on it. They're just driving 75, 80 miles an hour, and all of a sudden their headlights, maybe they see Keith's truck off, all twisted up, facing maybe the wrong way or whatever on the side of the road. And maybe they see skid marks or whatever all over the road. And they say, a wreck just happened, and these people pull over. Right? That's a very possibility regarding this. But it's certainly clearly, once again, Keith's fault. It does kind of sound like the wreck that happened a couple weeks before that, although in the other one, of course, he was still at the scene. He hit an 18-wheeler. He didn't run in total somebody else's car. This one seems to be much more violent than the first one was. In your opinion, given what happened, would Keith If he had been in his truck, or would he have been charged with anything? Would he have been in trouble? What do you think?
They did charge him
Okay.
and issue warrants for fleeing the scene
Okay.
and bodily injury.
Okay. And we should note the driver of this other vehicle not killed. We have pictures of the vehicles that Sharman has sent me. How this other person wasn't killed, I don't know. We're very fortunate that he survived, right? Very fortunate.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. It's a testament to the car that he was driving that it didn't flatten like a pancake when a big pickup truck landed on it. All right.
Yeah.
So, what were could they even do any searches that night? It's like you said, it's dark, it's desolate, not many vehicles out there, probably not a lot of search people or police people in that area anyway. Did they even attempt to do any searches that night at all?
From the body cam video from the DPS officer that worked the accident that night, you see him going from vehicle to vehicle and dealing with the witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
But you do not, there is, and yes, he had a flashlight in the lights of his vehicle, to illuminate the area, although it never shows him searching that into, even with the flashlight out there in this rugged, dense terrain. It would have been difficult to look for items, if you're looking for, say, Keith's phone or any evidence of, other than just working that crash scene and trying to gather the assumption of how this happened. I do not believe that night that there was a search. I do believe they were looking for Keith.
All right.
And other law enforcement was called in for that, but I don't think that they were specifically combing the area at that point in time.
And it very well could be that when they did not, whoever it was, maybe one of the passersby actually ran over to the truck. Of course, Keith's not in it. They might have been thinking, well, maybe he stumbled off and he's injured, and once the sun comes up, he'll just be lying somewhere under a tree or something. Right? Maybe that could have been the thinking.
Yes. One of the witnesses in the body cam video actually suggested to police, y'all need to get dogs out here and help find this kid.
Okay. All right, let's move on. All right, so we're going to come back to more complete searches here in a moment, but how did you find out about this, Sharman?
So I was not informed of the crash that night.
Okay.
The next morning, and it was about 10 minutes before his hitch or his day, Keith should have been on location. Now, if you work your 12-hour hitch and you need to go get groceries or you want to go somewhere for the night, that is allowed. You don't have to stay on location. A lot of times he did because he had to be there 12 hours later, and was very responsible about being at work. But about 10 minutes before Keith should have been there the next morning, I got the call from his dad and said, Keith's phone's going to voicemail and he's not here.
Huh.
And so he wanted to know, of course, that's his son. So
right.
he's wanting to protect, if he's going to be late, and I know the boss, Keith's supervisor, and had for years, a lot better than my ex-husband did. So he was wanting advice on what do I do, and he's new at this job too. He's wanting to protect his kid, but he's in his role, and just and at that time there wasn't a lot of concern of, where is he? Yes, we want to know where he was. Is he going to be late? Because it was 10 minutes prior. But the phone's going to voicemail, so there was some concern. But but two, we weren't like just over the top yet. And so I had said, you got to call Terry. You got to call his boss and let him know, that he's not there yet. Now, the guy that was still on hitch that night on tower was there and was experienced and had been, on that location working and was one of Keith's employees at the time. And, so as far as the job goes, we're not in a bind here because you've got skilled people on location that can stay over and tend to this and all of that. But too, the fact that Keith wasn't there was immediately concerning, but I wasn't my mind didn't go anywhere immediately, like over the top of, that something like this had happened, of course.
All right. So when did you find out about the wreck?
So when he called, I didn't get up immediately and just get in a rush and a panic and drive on down. I kind of dallied. I had, in the oil field, you kind of wake up and think about what do you have going on that day? What jobs do you have to cover? Who do I need to call and get your day lined out? And so I kind of dallied a little bit, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to, after an hour and hadn't heard anything, and then Keith truly is late to work, I had rigs of my own work in that, headed down towards that area, southeast of Odessa, where I lived, and I thought, I'm just going to put on my work clothes and go down there. I'm going to find Keith, or he's going to turn up. I'll get to see him, and I can get some work done. I didn't realize, of course, at that time,
right,
what had happened, or know what had happened. And so I wasn't in a hurry. And like I said, it's like 3 hours down there. So I didn't get there until early to mid-afternoon. And when I did, but by the time I had driven that distance, I was really worried. And the phone is still going to voicemail. And so Keith being very responsible. Now, I'm not going to say as a young man that there wasn't an instance or two where he might have gone with friends or a girl or gone to have a drink maybe after work and fell asleep and overslept. But that wasn't a rare occurrence. That wasn't a common occurrence. I'm sorry. And so, but by the time I got down that way, I was starting to panic. My son's phone is still going to voicemail. This isn't like him. The frequency of our conversations as well. And, and at the very least, he would have called his boss and said, oh, I overslept. I'm on my way. I'm sorry, whatever. And so I called, and that was at the point in time when I picked up the phone and I called Trace Hendricks, who I grew up with. And at that time, he was the chief of police for my hometown, just wanting some advice on, now I'm really worried, and what do I do next? And he said, you're going to go to the sheriff's department. You're going to give your name, tell your story, and see if they know if they've had any calls, if he's in jail, and all of that. So, and I probably at that point I'd already called all the local jails down there and hospitals on my way down. I was really starting to panic, and so I got down there to Ozona, which of course is 15 minutes south of his work location, and went to the sheriff's office. And there was I gave all of my information, Keith's information, told them, the situation, and they had no reports as far as that county's sheriff's office. But he did say, the sheriff's deputy that took my information did say, look, we also have in Ozona our local highway patrol department, our DPS office, and I want you to go there as well. So he guided me there, told me where it was, and I went in there. And this is mid-afternoon, kind of getting a little bit later in the day, and went there and walked in. And I do remember there being also a Texas Ranger that they office out of DPS offices and him kind of standing back, because I'm talking to DPS at this point in time, but listening, and they also said the same thing. I mean, we don't have any, that name's not familiar, we don't have anything, but did the same. Took his information, took my information, took my phone number. So when I left, the guys from the night before have still been up because Keith is still not at work, and I know they're tired, probably hungry. I called out there and said, "What do you guys need?" I'm headed that way. I wanted to go. That's where his dad was. That's where the guys were. I wanted to go talk to them. And see what information I could gather from them to help find Keith at this point in time. So I went, and all they wanted was Red Bull and or Monsters, and they were tired. And I went and grabbed food and all of the stuff that they asked for, and went to location. And when I drove up and was actually talking to Keith's dad, who both of us at that time were really worried. Keith's dad seemed to be very worried, upset, and that's when I got a phone call from the DPS office that said, "We know what happened. He was involved in a wreck last night, but here is your contact, because this is going to be under the county sheriff's office." So it's different. So Ozona is one county, and Sutton County is the next county over, which is home of Sonora, which is where Sonora, Texas is located. And he gave me the name of the sheriff's deputy there that I should call, and that would be my contact as far as everything that happened. And I contacted him.
All right, so that's how you found out. So you didn't find. So I guess what we're saying is it was your ex-husband's wife's truck, but she didn't get called. She didn't get called to say, "Hey, your truck's out here. It's wrecked on the other side of Sonora." That didn't happen?
No. So the truck was actually my ex-husband's sister's boyfriend.
Okay.
And so they live very far away from this. And of course, the truck was registered to him, but he was not contacted. No one was contacted by law enforcement to inform family or the owner of the truck that there had been a wreck.
So how did they know then that Keith was driving that truck?
I don't think anyone knows that. Okay. I've been asked many times, are you sure that was him? Right. The only thing I do know is that there was a wreck that night in the truck that he was driving, had been driving, and that since that, we haven't seen Keith.
Okay. But I should state, though, that his wallet eventually was found in the truck, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. We're going to come back to what was in the truck. So you find out, eventually, this is how you find out that they're telling you about, we think we know where Keith was, maybe because they found the wallet in the truck. Because there's no other way to connect Keith to the truck other than that, right?
Correct.
All right. He doesn't own it. He doesn't own it. He doesn't have insurance on it. Nothing.
Right.
Okay. All right. So we're gonna have to come back to that in more detail in a bit. But eventually, of course, sun comes up. The truck's sitting there. The other driver gets taken to the hospital. He survives. And a lot of searches have been done of that area and outside of the truck. Anything of Keith's ever found in the surrounding area?
No. They say that the phone was never located, although since the phone was on my plan, the last call was at 8 p.m. The phone, and I would have to look back. I believe there were texts after 8 p.m., but not many. They weren't concerning. I've called everybody on the phone list, everybody for text messages, from Keith's phone. But after the wreck, the phone was never used again. The phone had I've called it 1,000.
Yeah, I'm Charmin. I'm just asking about searches. Once the sun came up and they tried to, what searches were done in the area? What kind of equipment was used? How many people? What can you tell the listeners about that?
So we had gone down to the sheriff's office, and this is going into the second day. So this would be Friday. That morning, a lot of people started coming down to help me, and Trace Hendricks, the sheriff, or the chief of police at that time of my hometown, had come, and we wanted to go talk to the police, and they ended up getting us a helicopter from a private pilot who donated, his time, although we were supposed to pay for the fuel, and so they went up in the helicopter for several hours, actually, and 2 to 3 hours probably, and did kind of a grid search of that area. And when they got off the helicopter, they told me that they had seen men on horseback, men on foot, and then the sheriff's office had also said they searched a 7-mile radius with drones. So the immediate search was the helicopter, men on foot, men on horseback, and drone.
Wow.
Search.
Wow. That sounds like a lot of people. Were you there? Did you witness this yourself? Were you there? Or
I was at the ranch that butts up to the crash site is the 13,000 acre high fence game ranch in Texas, and I was at the airport during this time when the helicopter was up, and the pilot and the ranch foreman and my friend Trace were in the helicopter searching, and that they were the ones, not the sheriff's department, that told me that they had seen men on foot and men on horseback also searching.
Okay. Would you say that, once again, you've been to the area, I have not been to the area, would you say that all of the searches, whether they were part of government or not, were given full access to all of the surrounding area, like you said, like on that side of the highway, all the area to the north of there, like you said, 13,000 acres. Was any owners resistant to them going on there and searching? What do you remember?
I do believe, I do remember that the ranch managers, and I don't know if it was the owner of the ranch specifically, but the ranch management was very cooperative in allowing access to that ranch. And the ranch was not only on the north side, but also flowed into the south side of the highway where the wreck occurred. And I believe that they were very, very gracious to us as we sat at the airport where the helicopter landed and came back and landed. After they went and looked, they were very gracious.
Okay. Was anything ever found? Of course, out in the highways of the United States, you can find all sorts of things lying along the road, mattresses and boots and all sorts of things, parts of cars and everything. Did they find anything in this search that could be connected to Keith?
Of course, there were car parts everywhere.
Yeah.
Plastic pieces and all of that. And it wasn't until last year when I went back down that I found an axle and wheel to Keith's truck.
Wow.
And that was because in this area it's so rural, and we were not given correct coordinates from the sheriff's department at the beginning of this as to exactly where the wreck occurred. And so it was not until last year that I found the pieces of the truck. But no, there wasn't anything other than vehicle parts, anything that was alarming that was found at the scene.
Wow. Okay. So going all, like you said, a helicopter, I guess dogs out there, everything else. Nothing of Keith's. No dogs were ever used?
No dogs at that point in time. I have a team of dogs that I requested, and we actually, our next search, we're continuing to search, and we will have a search in April coming up. But it wasn't until I brought dogs in myself that dogs were ever used.
Okay. Everybody knows how I feel about dogs, but what did the dogs say? What did the dogs do?
So at this point in time, we're not looking for a scent, say a piece of clothing that you would introduce to a dog where you were looking for the trail of teeth. At this point in time, we are cadaver and we are looking for remains.
Right. Okay.
That window has passed to where.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So it seems they put in a lot of search work. You should know, Charmin, we don't talk about too many disappearances where helicopters are used. Oh, of course, we've talked about drones maybe quite a bit, but when it actually gets to helicopters, that's another level. And I've looked at this area. It's not the easiest area to search. It's not a forest out there, but there are just enough bushes and trees and everything that things could be hidden from the air, though, right? Could be.
Yes.
Could be. All right. And it is desolate. It's not easy to set up camp out there. It's surely an inconvenience for anybody who is going to be driving out there and searching and everything, given the distance from any incorporated or business area where people usually live. Okay. Yes. Let's move on to talk about that location, because still, all these years later, we know the truck was there. Maybe we're open to the idea maybe it wasn't Keith driving it. Remember, it wasn't his vehicle, even though he had been using it for not quite a couple weeks. Any idea, if it were Keith, why he would have been on I-10 headed east towards San Antonio? You've had a lot of time to think about this. You've talked to a lot of people about this. Anything at all?
Absolutely no idea why he would have been on that roadway headed in the direction he was headed. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the direction of going back home. I'm aware of no relationships in San Antonio area or anything going east from his work site.
Now, of course, there was this woman in his life who didn't thrill you too much. She did not live in San Antonio.
No.
Okay. Didn't live in that direction at all?
No.
All right. Any chance that she might have been over in that city and maybe is just not mentioned that to anybody? Is it possible that she actually was in San Antonio and that's why he was headed that direction? Has that ever been proven one way or the other?
No, I don't think so. And that relationship had dissolved, and so I don't think that they were even in contact at the time of his disappearance.
Okay, and we're also remembering this. We had this fraudulent credit card charge that you have an idea that maybe she caused it, and maybe that's the reason they weren't a couple anymore. Maybe.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so this is the big thing for this disappearance. Certainly, if it's somebody else driving the truck, maybe then that direction makes a lot more sense. But if it's some other person, it's a little crapshoot on who that would be. Right. But we should note though, Charmin, that these witnesses who said they saw somebody, could they absolutely 100% positively identify this person as Keith?
No.
All right, so this is still the big head scratcher. And of course, you just spoke to him like 3 hours before this, right? And he seemed fine. Didn't talk to anybody about going for a ride, going to meet anybody, nothing. Hello?
No.
All right. So you spoke to him 3 hours before that. He didn't say I'm going for a drive. He didn't say he was going to meet a friend. Nothing.
No, he just had said he was going to drop by his dad's hotel room and borrow some cash to get him through until his paycheck. And then his dad said he never showed up.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Of course, we've kind of talked about the contents of the truck anyway. But his wallet was in the truck?
Yes.
Okay. Was his phone in the truck?
No. Never located.
No phone in the truck. Would you say, just knowing your son the way you do, is there anything else missing besides himself and his phone?
No.
Mm-hmm. And then regarding his wallet, I have to ask, were there drugs found in the truck?
Yes, I believe the police said that there was a usable amount of drugs found inside of the wallet, although he was not charged with possession.
Okay. All right, so there's that. Okay. So let's move on to this. What you've seen, have you seen the truck up close? Have you been up to it? Have you been able to touch it? Been that close to it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I was allowed access to it twice after the crash.
Okay. What have the police told you about the crash? Does it look like Keith was wearing a seatbelt? Or is there any proof that he might have hit his head on the windshield or somewhere else? What kind of injuries? Have they been able to make any prediction on what kind of injuries Keith, or let's just say the driver of this truck, would have sustained in this wreck?
So, when my friend Trace got there, and he wanted to look at the truck, and the reason he wanted to look at the truck was to analyze, of course, what he thought. And so, on the windshield, the windshield, you would think, would be completely shattered in a wreck of the sort. But there is one small area, and it looks like, I think even you suggested that an object could have hit that, and it might not have been his head. There was no blood in the truck.
Right.
And so there isn't a small area on the windshield about in the middle, the upper middle of the windshield that was damaged, but the windshield wasn't completely shattered. He wanted to look at the integrity of the steering wheel to see if the steering wheel was broken, and he would have assumed that Keith's body hit the steering wheel so hard, and he would derive probably internal injuries if that was the case, but the steering wheel was intact and not damaged.
Right. Okay. What about the seatbelt again? Seatbelt looked like it was used or not?
This is something that you think you would remember every detail, but it's been so long now. I do believe that the airbags were deployed, and I think that the assumption was that he was wearing his seatbelt.
Okay. Well, that gives them a pretty good chance of surviving without too much injury.
Yes.
Okay, so he's not flopping around inside there, especially given that the truck went airborne and landed on another car, but it didn't flip, which is a good sign. But so we have some we have some damage to the interior, but having seen the pictures of myself, I would not say overtly so. And maybe just point blank, any blood found on the inside of the truck?
No.
All right. Okay, so that's the interior of the truck. We've gone through the contents. We've gone through, just the general condition of the interior. It sounded like the truck did its work in protecting the occupant, no matter who was driving, and no blood. And whoever it was, whether it was Keith or somebody else, whoever it was must have been in good enough condition to walk away from this wreck. You find out about this. Did you eventually go to Keith's, his RV, this place where he was living? And when you got there, did you find anything weird, anything missing, anything that caught your attention, anything that could point you in a direction as to why possibly he would have been going towards San Antonio?
No, not. There's never been anything that has given us information as to where he was going that night or why. Although Saturday, so the wreck happened Wednesday night. I found out, and on Thursday, on Friday we did the helicopter search, and of course during this time I'm showing his picture to anybody that'll look my way. Right. And And so I decided, we all kind of decided, we were just worn out on Saturday, that I would, I'm in contact with law enforcement, of course, but was going to go home and wanted to go by the location and have conversations with his coworkers out there.
Mm-hmm.
But also I had decided that I did not want the RV to stay there. And in my mind, in retrospect, I think that probably, not consciously, but it was almost like a preservation of evidence to me, because I didn't at the time, and still don't, feel like law enforcement was doing its due diligence, and I didn't want anything taken. My dad had passed; he was an airplane mechanic, had passed down his tools to my son, and I wanted to make sure that everything of my father's and my son's had come back with me. We have no idea where Keith is. I'm upset, traumatized, scared to death, just lost, and I wanted those things brought back to Odessa. I was part owner in the OV, or co-owner of the RV, and didn't want anything tampered with or taken. And so I went to location, and I hired a guy to get everything, a trusted person, to get everything and put it inside the RV and bring it back. And so it wasn't until Sunday I came back to Odessa on Saturday, and on Sunday I went to go look inside the RV and kind of do my due diligence. Let's see what's in here. If there's, I'm looking for anything and everything that, that might give me a hint of what's going on, or where he was headed. And when I entered the RV and started looking around, I noticed that all his clothes were gone. And, but they weren't in the truck. When I went, I said I had access to the truck twice. And the clothes were not there, not in the bed of the truck, not in the cab of the truck. So I'm like, where are his clothes? And at that point in time, I called back. I called one of his coworkers that worked with him daily, and the guy said, "Oh, I thought you knew. Your Keith's dad had packed up all of his clothes before you ever even got here on Thursday." And of course, apologized, because he assumed. He assumed that I had been given that information, that I knew, and just why? Why would you do that?
All right, so just put this in the timeline. Keith goes missing on Wednesday evening, and the very next day, his father goes in and takes all his clothes.
Yes, before I was able to get down there.
Okay.
He had.
I'm guessing you asked him about this. What'd he say?
So he didn't have an explanation for me as to why. I wanted the clothes. And this literally, when I really went and got in his face and confronted him about, I want an answer. Why did you do this, and where are his clothes? I wanted his clothes. When your child goes, you want that. And he had no explanation for me. No comment. Wouldn't talk about it.
Did he even admit doing it?
Yes, he admitted doing it and told me he had them, but would not let me see them, would not let me allow me to even see them. Nor would he give them to me.
All right, so I have to ask: is this just a thing because you're his ex-wife, or is it something more than that? Your opinion?
Yeah, it's got to be something more than that. We have always been pretty cordial to each other. As Keith was growing up, like I said, Keith could go to his dad's whenever he wanted to. I'm baffled to this day about why he wanted them. Well, I mean, at that point in time, like it was, like I said, like a year later before I was like, I want these clothes. Keith's not here, and I want his stuff. I want it for whatever reason. Do I want him because I want to smell him or be near him? They're like, why? Why do I even want him? But why would he pack those up? So that's always been a lingering question that's never been answered.
All right, so that's still not only is the disappearance a mystery, it is a mystery why his father went and got his clothes.
Yes.
All right, where are those clothes now?
I'm assuming still with him.
Wow. Okay. Have you ever what kind of relationship did you have with his wife at the time?
So whenever I first got down there, she hopped in the truck with me. My ex-husband was still on his day hitch that day, and she hopped in the truck with me. And so whenever they started dating, she was hesitant. She's several years younger than my ex-husband, and I had worked with her mother. We're all from the small town and closer to East Texas, and so she and I, she didn't want to tell me that she was dating Keith's dad, but when Keith was little, she'd actually been his babysitter, and so of course we'd been divorced for years. He'd had 2 other wives since her, before her, and in between us, and so, I was still friends with her mother and her father and her sisters, and, just had acclimated to the fact that this is, his wife. She had a good relationship with Keith, and so we weren't close by any means. You don't really buddy up to your ex-wife's or your ex-husband's wife, but we were fine, at that point in time. And so, since then the relationship is non-existent, but we were fine. And she actually went with me that first evening, because I'm looking everywhere and going into both Ozona and Sonora, trying to show Keith's picture, going to hotels, going to convenience stores, driving around in the country, screaming his name, looking for him, going to the crash site, digging around there and all of that. And she was with me that first evening and throughout most of the night.
Did you ever ask her why he took the clothes?
No, I was never given the opportunity, because this was kind of after the fact that I with him and asked those questions. So it was on the phone, and I was directing that directly at Keith's father, not at her. Number one, I didn't feel anything towards her, but something that was weird, and you may want to edit this out later, I don't know, but is that she kept insisting that day when we were driving around together. She kept saying things like, I feel like he's passed. I feel like he's deceased. And I just finally looked at her and asked her not to say that again.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if I have to edit that out. That's just what she was saying. A lot of people, once again, in my work, I don't find that to be unusual. A lot of people say that. That's usually a lot of people's initial reactions, and unfortunately, a lot of time they're right. They don't know that they're right, but that's just a feeling they have.
And of course, I had that feeling. Is he? But as the mother, I'm the one that's going to remain hopeful. I'm the one that's going to continue to search, and I just didn't want to hear maybe somebody else. So was it going through my mind? Yes, but do I want to hear that out loud? I didn't, and I asked her not to say that again.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to come back to the father in a bit, but let's talk about that phone stuff again. So you spoke to him at 6:30, and then he spoke to this friend. Of course, the friend called him at 7:30, 8, and then at 8 o'clock, there was this 1-minute call between Keith's phone and his supervisor, something 1 minute, but I don't know if we're inclined to think that any message was left or anything, right?
Yes, and it was just 1 minute. Did it go to voicemail? And that is the minute. I don't even know, how phone records are.
Right.
Like that. Or did he pick up the phone and it was just a short check-in? Maybe he had a question about something that was in the logs that day from work, and it was just a quick conversation. I don't know.
Okay. But you've also stated that the company really wasn't helpful with that either, were they?
They were concerned about their reputation and what this might look like for them, and they weren't very, they didn't communicate with me at all. They weren't very helpful.
Okay. All right. But looking at those phone records, you're in possession of those phone records, not just calls, but texts. As best as you can tell, between 8 o'clock and we know the rec time to be 9:30 something, any calls or texts made during that time at all?
There's no calls after 8 p.m., and I do not have the text in front of me, but like I said, I go after the fact, and in the days and weeks after, and literally, I called every single number probably from the date of the crash, going back 3 months, to every person that would talk to me that I could get a hold of that was in his phone records, and just, what was your conversation about? Why? So there was nothing that to me that was ever alarming, or nothing that I thought that I should take to law enforcement at that time, as far as whatever. And they declined to delve into his records or to try to ping the phone or anything like that.
Yeah. All I'm trying to establish, Charmin, is from 8 o'clock until 9:30 something when the wreck happened, there's no use of his phone at all.
I do believe that there was some text in between that, but when I actually called people, I mean, it wasn't anything mentionable.
Okay. All right. Is there any idea maybe that Keith could have had another phone?
I do not know if he did or not.
And nobody's ever intimated anybody of his friends, any coworkers, never said they saw him in possession of more than one phone?
No one ever suggested that.
All right. Okay, so he's out there seemingly, maybe not. I think a lot of people probably are just going to, maybe just to keep it simple, that Keith actually was in the truck, but I guess there's no scientific evidence. But we have these seemingly nothing notable. If he's in the truck, he's just driving. He's not calling people. He's not texting people. I know we're not supposed to text and drive, but everybody does anyway. All right, so not a lot of phone activity, before this truck wreck. All right. Regarding that friend who called, you've actually had a chance to talk to that friend, and you've given this friend multiple chances to maybe change his story on that call, and he hasn't done that, right?
I think I've talked to him 2 different occasions, and in front of him, directly to him, not by phone conversation. Or I'm sure I've called him. I called him before that, but I've actually gotten in his face twice and to question, but y'all were talking about work, but you no longer worked with him or worked for the company. Why would you be talking about work? Were you talking about something? Give me anything. And he stuck to that they were discussing the job.
Okay, maybe he was asking, let's just say, for example, maybe he was calling Keith maybe for a second chance or something.
I don't know.
Yeah, we don't, but all right. Okay, so there's that. But we should remind everybody, the phone was not found in the truck, and it was not found in the surrounding area despite extensive searches, right? So the phone and Keith are still missing.
Yes.
All right, and did they ever do any pinging to prove that the phone was actually out there east of Sonora?
No. Law enforcement declined. Sutton County Sheriff's Department declined, and told me I needed to contact AT&T and have that done myself. And when I contacted AT&T, they said the police were supposed to do it, so nobody would do it.
Okay. All right, that's not funny, but all right. So the police telling you to do it. They can't do it. You can't do it either. So it's like a hot potato. Hot potato.
Yes.
You do it. All right. So the pinging would verify whether the phone was out there east of Sonora or not, but we don't have that information.
Right.
Okay. Let's go back to talking about Keith's dad. Now, we've kind of you already mentioned this early on, but we need to reiterate this because this whole truck being east of Sonora is not the only strange thing. Remember, everybody, that Keith called you for money. You said you couldn't help him just due to technology, not that you didn't want to. You told him to go to his father, who was, of course, easy to find, easy access, could find him within a matter of minutes. And the father ended up telling you, nope, Keith never asked me for money, correct?
Yes.
Not just that, no, I refused to give him money. It was, he says that Keith never even brought it up.
Never brought it up, never came to his hotel room, never called him and said, hey, I'm going to come by and grab a few bucks. Never came, or, I want to say that he did call and tell his dad, hey, I need some cash, but never came and retrieved the cash.
All right, so he did ask his father for cash or not?
I do believe that his dad has said, yeah, he called and asked me, but then he never got it. He never showed up.
Huh. All right. Okay, so go see your father about money. Maybe he tried to, and then maybe he never showed up. Okay. Let's just keep this very general. Would you say that Keith's father was engaged in finding Keith as much as you were?
No. Whenever we were granted the helicopter, when the pilot donated his time in his helicopter to search, and literally after the first night of me showing up, his dad never came to the helicopter search and was not involved in any of the days after. He never showed back up. He never showed up.
Okay. Would you say, did he talk to police? Did police go talk to him? Did he talk to them? Of course, he's working with his son. He was one of the last people to see him. Did he talk to them, give them information?
On Friday, we were headed to look at the vehicle with my friend who's in law enforcement, and he became the person that spoke with police. So just delirious at this point, and he became the contact person. So they called Trace and said, the Sutton County Sheriff's Office called Trace and said that the county in which Ozona is in, that sheriff's department had called, and they had gotten a tip, supposedly, that Keith had arrived, he had gotten to his dad, that he was with his dad. So the police from Ozona, the sheriff's office there, went into his hotel room, and Keith was not found there.
Okay. All right. As the father, I realize you've had some problems with him, since this all happened, of course, with the clothes and other things. Do you know if he's ever offered up his own theory about if Keith was in that truck, why Keith would be in that truck headed east on I-10?
No, nothing at all. He indicated to me that he was as lost as I am as to where he could have been going or why.
Okay. All right. His job. He lost it not long after Keith went missing. Why did that happen? Of course, you weren't there, but what is your understanding?
My understanding is that there were concerns that he was grasping the requirements of the job, but that things had kind of deteriorated at work, maybe even somewhat with Keith since his dad showed up.
Mm-hmm.
And simply because his dad had no participation in the search or seemed unconcerned. He wasn't blowing up my phone for updates. Even if he wasn't going to come, then he wasn't even calling to find out what are we doing or any of that. And because Keith's supervisor and him had a long relationship and were very good friends, that just kind of flew all over him. And he just, to their contract, they weren't W-2 employees. So, with that, you can get called back to a job or just not. They're using them as contract. And so the company immediately declined to allow him to continue.
Wow. All right, so Keith goes missing. Keith's father loses his job.
Yes.
Okay. Now, on top of this, though, we've talked about the father's wife. She went to jail during the investigation into Keith's disappearance. Why did that happen?
When they entered the hotel room, which was the county in which, in Ozona, where the sheriff's department entered the hotel room, they, I'm assuming they ran their names at that point in time to, not so much that they didn't know who each one was, but just to determine that this is mother or father and his wife. And they ran their names, and she had warrants, I guess, for tickets or something, and they took her to jail.
Wow. Okay. Well, so were there warrants out for her arrest?
Yes.
Is that how we're supposed to understand this?
Yes, there were warrants out from her arrest, not from that county, probably from back home. But they found the warrants when they ran her name to, I guess, just verify who, that she was who she says she is, and found the warrant, so they incarcerated her.
Wow. Okay, and I need to ask you, of course, we talked about how his father took his clothes. What about the rest of Keith's stuff? Did you get to collect the rest of that, or what?
There was very minimal personal belongings of his, in the RV, of course, he basically lived in it, even though it was at his work location, he lived there. And so, there, of course, were like pots and pans and things like that. But personal belongings, anything that was, clothing, I cannot remember if there were, whatever it was, say hygiene, shampoo, razors, things like that. Whatever was left was extremely minimal.
Huh. Okay, so he got the clothes and there wasn't much else.
Right.
All right, for you to collect. Okay. What did the actual owner of the vehicle, this truck, have to say about all this? Have you ever spoken to that person? What?
So, it wasn't him, but his girlfriend, which was Keith's dad's sister, that I was in communication with.
Okay.
And it was the day after the wreck, and into the next day. So the Thursday and Friday. The wreck happened on a Wednesday. The Thursday and Friday, there were conversations on the phone and via text, and her concern was only who is Keith's insurance through. They were wanting to know how they were going to get paid for the truck. And I believe that they actually retrieved the truck. The truck, of course, was towed from the wreck site to it was a towing company that towed it to their yard. And they did eventually come retrieve the truck themselves and tow it back to their place of residence. But they were not concerned about what had happened to Keith at all. They wanted to know about the insurance. And at the time, Keith was 26 years old. He had his own insurance and all of that. And I because of their attitude, I wasn't forthcoming in providing the insurance. I flat out told her, I don't care to discuss this with you. We'll deal with this later. I don't even know who the insurance. I'd have to look this up, and so I didn't provide it, but that they were adamant that they wanted it right then and there, and that who was going to pay for this.
Okay. Were they even aware that Keith was the one driving the truck? Like, were they aware that he was using it in the couple weeks before this happened?
I'm not sure if they had asked direct permission from the sister and her boyfriend that owned the truck. I had told that, his name was Randy, that Randy knew, that the truck, that Keith was allowed to drive the vehicle into. Randy's a good guy. I don't see that Randy would have had any objections. This wasn't his primary vehicle. It was just kind of a truck he had laying around, just an older vehicle that he had kept, for maybe if his truck ever broke down, just an extra vehicle. And that's why, that Brandy had been allowed to use it, the girlfriend, and then why my son was allowed access to it. It wasn't an expensive truck. It wasn't a brand new truck, and it of course, it wasn't like a throwaway truck either, but I don't see why he would have a problem with that. Just because that's the kind of guy he was. He would have agreed.
Okay, so we finally hear from the person who actually owned the vehicle and couldn't offer much insight into the use of it either. Now, you do have a story, moving on, you do have a story about when you finally came back to your place involving your shower. Why don't you tell the listeners about it?
I came back on that Saturday, and of course, at the same time, I had someone that was retrieving the RV and bringing it back. But I went back to Odessa, and at the time, I worked for a company that furnished me housing, and I lived in a fifth wheel RV in a very nice trailer park in between Odessa and Midland. And so I got back, and in this RV, if anyone's not familiar, a 50-amp RV has 2 air conditioners. So this is a larger RV with the upstairs. You go up the stairs, of course, which is over the tongue of the RV, and into the bedroom area. And you walk up the stairs, and there's a shower to the right, and directly across from that is the commode with a door. And I had a rack on the back of that door where you could just reach out of the shower and grab your towel. And I walked in knowing that Keith, number one, knew where I lived and that he had access to the RV and could enter the RV. Knew where the hidden key was, if he ever needed to go in there, and that was fine with my employer, fine with me. Of course, he was my child. And so I go back, and of course, because we were so very close, I was praying and hoping that Keith had gotten there. It's always been in the back of my mind that I would be the one that Keith would come to, and that we would fix it together. And so I'm entering the RV with the eyes wide open, looking at everything, and I'm a little OCD as well, and so everything has its place. So if I walk in and something has been moved, I'm going to notice it immediately, but I'm walking in looking for that and calling out his name and saying, literally, the police aren't with me, it's Mom. Because I'm thinking, what's going through? If he did truly know what he was doing when he left the scene of the accident, and he did truly flee, and he did end up at my place, I wanted him to know that he was safe with me. And so I'm looking at everything, and I walked upstairs, and the shower's right there, and there's water. So there's an air conditioner in the bedroom. There's an air conditioner in the living room of this RV. So there's 2. It's September. It's hot in Odessa, and I left them running. And that the shower is tiny in an RV, and it would have dried up. But I've been gone since Wednesday. This is Saturday afternoon, and there would not be water. And I took pictures of the water in the shower. And they're like, if somebody opens the door, there's going to be water trickling down the outside lip of the bottom of the shower. And there was water there, and the towel was wet. Although there was no other indication, nothing had been moved or anything. And I thought, he's been here. He's been here. And so I just thought, okay, I'm gonna just wait this out. Maybe he got spooked and left, and he's just going to show up in the middle of the night, but never did. But that was my feeling. I of course, I had some girlfriends, and I not that they would, but I called and just said, hey, did you come over here and take a shower? While nobody had, maybe their water had been out, and that was the case, and that was, but it wasn't, but nothing ever gave me any other indication that he had ever been to Odessa after that.
Okay, so we got this story. Of course, he was missing. We can't deny that. And then you have the story that you haven't been in your RV for your trailer for 3 days. You come back and there is water in the bathroom, in the shower, and the towel is wet. 3 days after you had used it.
Yes.
Okay. In the past 7.5 years, it doesn't matter who the person is at all. Has anybody, if it was Keith in the vehicle, in the truck, has anybody come up with an explanation that is even plausible to you? Any good theory that you've ever heard about why he would have been on I-10 headed east on the other side of Sonora?
People have, of course, given opinions, and of course, in the beginning, I didn't listen to anything anybody really had to say. You're just so lost. Yeah. And it because that area is in the southern part of Texas, the border isn't that far. So, there's suggestions of immigrants, coyotes that he may have encountered. There has been suggestions on, was he dealing in large quantities and could have been on a run where there was a vehicle following him that picked him up. 7.5 years is a long time to stay gone off the grid. But other than that, there's not just really anything that has a theory that has just stuck with me, or that I believe, happened that night. Yeah, we just don't know.
One thing that does come to my mind, being that he was riding all that way to see this other woman who they had a falling out, maybe over the credit card issue, what comes to my mind is, could he have met some other woman, let's say online, and was going to see her somewhere?
Could have been.
But there's no proof he was having any interactions like that, are there?
No.
All right. How hard has this been, Charmin? It's been 7.5 years. You obviously are very involved in this to this day. How hard has this been?
The not knowing will eat your soul. And so, just, if he did make it out of there, how do you just fall off the grid? His relationships were meaningful and deep with his friends, his family. The wondering will eat you alive. The not knowing, and at one point in time, you just have to make a choice of whether or not you choose to live or just wallow in it. I feel like my job and your podcast continuing this 7.5 years later. My job is awareness. Getting his face out there, getting his story out there, so that if there was anyone that knows anything, I'm not going to be mad at anybody for who cares what it was back then, for being transparent in what was other things that could have been going on in Keith's life that I don't know about. Anything helps, but it's been very long and very difficult, and I have continued. The authorities in that area haven't been very active in searching for him, and they actually closed his case, and he's still missing. So that's on me, I feel like. And so I dive in when I can and rehash all this. It's very difficult, of course. And then I have to take a break because it'll eat your soul. And then I dive back in and I try to do some awareness. I am in the process of trying to get the case reopened. I'm actually searching for a lawyer who will sue that county at this point in time, just things. And then, like I mentioned, we will go back down with my team of dogs, Team Texas Canines, in April and do another search. And we search literally at this point in time. We think we've exhausted the ranch into our personal feeling, and this is just a feeling, and this is just our thoughts. But the lady that does have dogs, she and I both believe that he didn't cross the high fence. And so we look, she has a radius that she's promised me that she will not give up, and we will continue to do these searches and schedule these searches until that radius is cleared, and so we continue to search to this day. There's also been another search where the county actually did get involved a couple of years ago, and so we continue to search. And but yeah, it's hard not knowing where your kid is and resolving to the fact that he's probably deceased, but you don't have those remains and you just want to bury him.
Charmin, do you have a website, Facebook page, anything like that set up for Keith's disappearance? If so, tell listeners about it right now.
I do have a page set up, and it is called Bringing Keith Home, and that is a Facebook page. And so it has, of course, my phone number, my contact information, anonymous, anything anonymous can be given through there. I don't care. Any information is welcome. But it also kind of gives a view of Keith and his life and all of that.
Okay. Why don't you give the name out one more time?
Bringing Keith Home on Facebook.
Bringing Keith Home. Okay. Charmin, any final words before we complete this interview?
I appreciate you doing this so much, and I appreciate all your listeners, and just people that don't even know us, that are vested in listening and being curious and keeping this in the back of their minds, or if they ever, see Keith or hear anything, I'd be welcome to any information. But I just appreciate you allowing me on your platform to raise awareness of what happened.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome, Charmin. And in fact, everybody should know you and I talked some years ago, and then I'm still trying to figure out why we didn't do this interview way back then. That's surely my fault. But in fact, the first time I think I contacted you recently, I was like, I know we talked a while ago, but I can't figure out what happened here. And it was, like I said, it was my fault. So, Charmin, it's finally nice to have you on here. Of course, I wish we didn't have to do this. And, of course, I wish that, he had been found alive before I could contact you again. But here we are, and I'm happy to reconnect with you.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
You're very welcome, and I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And that was my February 15th, 2026 interview with Charmin, mother of Stephen Keith Roberson. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. I will reiterate that I have no idea why she wasn't on Unfound at least a couple of years ago. I'll take the blame. Because, as you could tell, Charmin was a great guest. And an even better person. I made a map video for Keith's disappearance. You can find it on Unfound's YouTube channel. Given that she got mentioned in the opening, I can't unsee the similarities between Mara Murray's disappearance and Keith's. 2 wrecks for each within a short amount of time, both seemingly covering up issues in their lives. Mara, she might have been an alcoholic. Keith, most likely a relapse into pills. Both driving somebody else's vehicle. Both vehicles wrecked in places that are not easily explained. And, of course, the belief by some that Mara and Keith weren't actually driving those vehicles. It's creepy, all the similarities, right? But I will admit, in my opinion, Keith's is the bigger mystery. Its area is easier to search. Mara's location had forests all around. Mara was at least vaguely familiar with that area in New Hampshire. Whereas with Keith, he was much less familiar with that area of Texas. Mara made internet searches, at least vaguely detailing some kind of plan to go to New Hampshire. Whereas for Keith, we have nothing. No info telling us that he planned to be east of Sonora. For Mara, we have the bus driver as a witness. For Keith, we have no one. Thus, I ask you, why is Mara's more well known? Whatever your opinion on the comparisons, we can't ignore the stats that I noted in the summary. Hit and runs, people wrecking and running off, is a huge problem in the United States and anywhere cars are the primary transportation. But you only learn that here. Most other hosts will try to convince you how rare, mysterious, and suspicious this all is, this thing of car accidents and people running off. Well, it isn't. I think all those people need a crash course. If you'd like to hear and read more of my in-depth analysis into the disappearance of Keith Roberson, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. Sign up and partake in the Unfound blog. Until then, I leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. I'm Ed Dunsel, and you've been listening to Unfound.